On my 60th birthday, my wife spent the night dancing with my best friend, ignoring me completely. As she walked by, I heard her say, "Our marriage is falling apart. He's so boring." They laughed while I watched. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Gregory, and I turned 60 years old on what should have been one of the happiest nights of my life. Instead, it became the night I discovered that the two people I trusted most in this world had been making a fool of me for God knows how long. The party was Linda's idea. She insisted we celebrate at the country club, the same place where we'd had our wedding reception 35 years ago. I thought it was sweet, nostalgic even. Looking back now, I realize she probably chose it because Robert would be there too, playing his usual role as the charming guest who somehow always ended up being the center of attention. Robert Harris had been my best friend since college. We'd built our accounting firm together, weathered every storm side by side. He was the best man at my wedding, the godfather to our children. If someone had told me that morning what I would witness that evening, I would have laughed in their face. The evening started normally enough. Linda looked stunning in her navy blue dress, the one that always made her eyes sparkle. She'd spent hours getting ready, which I attributed to wanting everything perfect for my big day. She kissed my cheek when the first guests arrived and whispered, "Happy birthday, honey. This night is going to be unforgettable." She was right about that, just not in the way either of us expected. The first hour went smoothly. Colleagues from the firm mingled with neighbors and old friends. I worked the room like I always did, shaking hands, accepting birthday wishes, playing the role of the gracious host. Linda was at my side initially, her hand resting on my arm as she smiled and laughed at all the right moments. But then the music started, and everything changed. Robert appeared at Linda's elbow just as the band began playing. He was dressed in his expensive charcoal suit, the one that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and he wore that confident smile that had charmed clients for decades. "Linda," he said, extending his hand, "would you honor me with a dance?" I expected her to decline politely, to say she wanted to dance with her husband first. Instead, she practically glowed as she took his hand. "I thought you'd never ask," she said, and they swept onto the dance floor. I stood there, champagne glass in hand, watching my wife of 35 years dance with my best friend. At first I told myself it was innocent. Robert was a good dancer, always had been. Linda loved to dance, and I'd never been particularly skilled at it. It made sense that she'd want to enjoy herself. But as the minutes ticked by, I began to notice things that made my stomach clench. The way her hand lingered on his shoulder, how they leaned in close to whisper to each other, the way they looked at each other when they thought no one was watching. And most painfully, the way she never once glanced in my direction. I tried to mingle, to focus on my other guests, but my eyes kept drifting back to the dance floor. Song after song, they remained together. Other couples joined them, separated, switched partners, but Linda and Robert stayed locked in their own little world. "Great party, Greg," said Tom Matthews, one of our newer clients. "Linda and Robert sure know how to light up a dance floor, don't they?" The casual way he said it, as if their connection was obvious to everyone, hit me like a physical blow. I managed a weak smile and excused myself, heading toward the bar for something stronger than champagne. That's when I made the mistake of walking too close to the dance floor. That's when I heard the words that would haunt me for months to come. "Our marriage is crumbling," Linda was saying to Robert, her voice just loud enough for me to catch over the music. "He's so boring, Robert, so predictable. I feel like I'm suffocating." Robert pulled her closer, his hand sliding down her back in a way that was anything but friendly. "You deserve better than that, sweetheart. You deserve passion, excitement. You deserve someone who sees how incredible you are. You always know exactly what to say," she murmured, and then she actually giggled. My wife of 35 years giggled like a schoolgirl in the arms of my best friend. I stood frozen, the scotch burning in my throat, as they continued their conversation. "How much longer are we going to keep pretending?" Robert asked. "Not much longer," Linda replied. "I'm tired of living a lie. I want to be with someone who makes me feel alive again." The room seemed to spin around me. The laughter and chatter of the party became a distant buzz. I felt like I was drowning in my own living room, surrounded by people who were celebrating what was apparently the death of my marriage. I somehow made it back to the bar, where I stood gripping my glass so tightly I was surprised it didn't shatter. I watched them dance to 3 more songs, whispering and laughing, completely oblivious to the fact that they had just destroyed my world. The worst part wasn't even what they said. It was the way they said it, so casually, so carelessly. As if my feelings, my life, my 35 years of marriage were nothing more than an inconvenience to be swept aside. When the song finally ended, Linda walked straight past me without so much as a glance. She went to the ladies' room, and Robert joined a group of our mutual friends, slapping backs and telling jokes as if nothing had happened. I spent the rest of my birthday party feeling like a ghost at my own celebration. People congratulated me, clinked glasses with me, told me how lucky I was to have such a wonderful wife and loyal friend. If only they knew. The cake cutting was torture. Linda stood beside me, smiling for the cameras, her hand covering mine on the knife. She played the part of the loving wife perfectly. But I could see the truth now. I could see how forced her smile was, how her eyes never quite met mine. "Make a wish, honey," she said as I leaned over the candles. I closed my eyes and wished for the strength to get through whatever was coming next, because I knew with absolute certainty that my life as I'd known it was over. As the last guests finally left around midnight, I helped clean up while Linda changed out of her party dress. Robert was one of the last to leave, and he pulled me into what felt like a Judas embrace. "Great party, buddy," he said, patting my back. "Here's to another 60 years of friendship." I wanted to punch him. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just nodded and watched him walk away, probably to call Linda as soon as he got to his car. Later, as I lay in bed beside my sleeping wife, I stared at the ceiling and tried to process what had happened. 35 years of marriage, 30 years of friendship, all apparently built on lies. I thought about our children, grown now with families of their own. I thought about the business Robert and I had built together. I thought about the life I'd believed was solid and real. But mostly, I thought about the way Linda had looked at Robert when she thought no one was watching. It was the way she used to look at me back when we were young and everything seemed possible. Now I knew that somewhere along the way, I had become the boring, predictable husband who was suffocating her. The question was, what was I going to do about it? As dawn broke through our bedroom windows, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront them. I wasn't going to beg or plead or make a scene. Instead, I was going to do something they would never expect. I was going to become the man they clearly thought I could never be. The morning after my birthday party, I woke up to the sound of Linda humming in the shower. She was actually humming, as if she hadn't just shattered my world the night before. The cheerful melody drifted through our bedroom, and I felt sick to my stomach. I stayed in bed pretending to sleep while she got dressed for work. She moved around our bedroom with a lightness I hadn't seen in years, practically floating as she selected her clothes. She chose a red dress I'd bought her for Christmas 2 years ago, one she'd claimed she never had occasion to wear. "Greg, honey, I'm leaving for work," she called out, but there was something different in her voice, an excitement that definitely wasn't directed at me. After I heard the garage door close, I got up and did something I'd never done in 35 years of marriage. I went through Linda's things. I started with her purse, which she'd left on the kitchen counter. My hands shook as I opened it, feeling like a criminal in my own home. Inside, tucked behind her wallet, I found a small piece of paper with Robert's handwriting. "Dinner tomorrow night? I can't stop thinking about last night." Last night. While I was cutting my birthday cake, they were already planning their next encounter. I put the note back exactly where I'd found it and went to Linda's side of our walk-in closet. Hidden behind her winter coats, I discovered a small gift box I'd never seen before. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet with an inscription, "To my darling Elle, until we can be together always. All my love, R." The bracelet was beautiful, expensive, and definitely not something a business partner gives to his friend's wife. I photographed it with my phone before putting it back, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. But the real evidence was on her phone, which she'd forgotten to take to work. Linda had never been particularly careful about her passwords, always using our anniversary date for everything. The irony wasn't lost on me as I typed in those numbers and accessed her text messages. What I found there destroyed whatever small hope I'd been clinging to that maybe I'd misunderstood their conversation at the party. The messages between Linda and Robert went back 2 years. 2 years of planning secret meetings, expressing frustration about having to pretend at family gatherings, and, worst of all, mocking me. "Greg actually thanked me for helping him plan your surprise trip to Napa," read one message from Robert. "If only he knew I was planning it so we could have the weekend alone together." Linda's response made my blood run cold. Poor Greg. He has no idea how good it feels to be with a real man again. You make me remember what passion feels like. I scrolled through months of messages, each one more painful than the last. They had turned my generosity, my trust, my love into a joke between them. Every time I'd praised Robert for being such a good friend. Every time I'd encouraged Linda to spend time with him because I thought it made her happy. I'd been facilitating my own betrayal. There were photos, too. Pictures of them at restaurants I'd never been to, hotels I'd never seen. Linda looked radiant in every single one, glowing with happiness I hadn't seen her display around me in years. One message thread from just 3 weeks earlier caught my attention. "Robert, how much longer can we keep this up? I want to be with you properly." Linda, "I know, darling. I've been thinking the same thing. Maybe it's time to tell Greg." Robert, "Are you sure you're ready for that conversation?" Linda, "He's going to be devastated. But honestly, Robert, I stopped loving him years ago. I've just been going through the motions. He deserves someone who can love him the way he needs, and I deserve to be happy." Robert, "You're incredible, Linda. Greg has no idea what he's about to lose." Linda, "His loss will be your gain. Besides, he'll land on his feet. He always does. He's good at taking care of himself." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. After 35 years of marriage, I'd been reduced to someone who always lands on his feet and would take care of himself. No concern for my feelings, no guilt about the betrayal, no acknowledgement of the life we'd built together. I sat in my home office, staring at the phone screen, and felt something I'd never experienced before. It wasn't just heartbreak or anger. It was a cold, calculating fury that settled in my chest like ice. When Linda came home that evening, she was practically glowing. She'd clearly spent her lunch hour with Robert, and the guilty happiness radiating from her was unmistakable. "How was your day, honey?" she asked, kissing my cheek with lips that had probably been on Robert's just hours before. "Fine," I managed, watching her face carefully. "How was yours?" "Oh, same old thing, meetings, paperwork, the usual." Post. She moved around our kitchen with that same light step from the morning, preparing dinner while humming again. "I saw Robert briefly today," she added casually. "He mentioned wanting to take you fishing next weekend. You should go, Greg. You work too hard." The audacity of it stunned me. She was actively encouraging me to spend time with the man she was sleeping with, probably so they could have more time together without arousing suspicion. "That sounds nice," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "You could use the quiet time too. Maybe visit your sister in Portland like you've been talking about." Her eyes lit up. "That's a wonderful idea. I'll call Sarah tonight." Of course she would. Sarah lived 3 hours away, which would give Linda and Robert an entire weekend to play house while I was supposedly fishing. As we ate dinner, Linda chattered about her day, her upcoming projects at work, our neighbor's latest drama. She seemed more animated than she'd been in months, and I realized why. She was happy because she thought she'd found her way out of our marriage without having to do the hard work of actually ending it honestly. "Greg, can I ask you something?" she said as I cleared our plates. My heart stopped. This was it. She was going to ask for a divorce, or confess about Robert, or finally drop the pretense that everything was normal. "Of course," I said, turning to face her. "Do you ever think about what you want the next phase of your life to look like? I mean, we're getting older, the kids are grown, we have more freedom now. Do you ever think about making changes? She was testing the waters, seeing how I'd react to the idea of our life changing dramatically. 2 days ago, I would have told her that I was perfectly happy with our life as it was. I would have asked what she had in mind, eager to make her happy. Instead, I looked at her directly and said, "Actually, yes, I have been thinking about that lately. I think you're right that it's time for some changes." Something flickered across her face. Surprise maybe, or relief. "Really? What kind of changes?" "I'm not sure yet," I said, "but I think I've been too comfortable, too set in my ways. Maybe it's time I started living life on my own terms for once." She nodded enthusiastically. "I think that's wonderful, Greg. We both deserve to be happy." Happy. The word hung in the air between us, loaded with meaning neither of us was willing to acknowledge directly. That night, as Linda slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling and planned my next moves. She was right about one thing. We both deserved to be happy. But she had no idea that my happiness was going to look very different from what she imagined. She thought she was manipulating me toward a convenient divorce where she could run off with Robert and still maintain her comfortable lifestyle. She thought I was the same predictable, manageable Greg who would quietly accept whatever she decided to hand him. She was about to learn just how wrong she was about that. The weekend arrived, and just as I'd predicted, Linda was suddenly enthusiastic about visiting her sister in Portland while I went fishing with Robert. She packed her nicest clothes for what was supposed to be a casual family visit, spent an hour on her hair and makeup, and kissed me goodbye with what I now recognized as guilt-driven affection. "Have fun with Robert," she said, adjusting my fishing hat with motherly concern. "Try to relax, honey. You've been working too hard lately." I watched her drive away, knowing she was headed to some romantic weekend getaway with my best friend, and felt that cold fury settle deeper in my chest. But instead of confronting them or following her, I did something that would have shocked them both. I stayed home and began investigating my own life. I started with our photo albums, something I hadn't looked at in years. What I found there was more disturbing than any text message or hidden gift. As I flipped through decades of family pictures, a pattern emerged that made me question everything I thought I knew about my marriage. In the early photos, from our 20s and 30s, Linda and I looked genuinely happy together. We were holding hands, laughing, looking at each other with obvious affection. But somewhere around our 10th anniversary, something changed. In family photos from the last 15 years, I was almost always positioned slightly apart from Linda and the kids. Not dramatically, just enough that I looked like a visitor in my own family rather than the center of it. I studied a Christmas photo from 5 years ago. Linda sat on the couch with our daughter Sarah and son Michael, all three of them leaning into each other naturally. I stood behind the couch, my hand awkwardly placed on Linda's shoulder, looking like someone who'd been asked to pose with strangers. When had I become so peripheral in my own family? I called Sarah that afternoon, something I realized I hadn't done in months. Usually she called me, and usually she asked to speak to Linda first. "Dad, hi," she said, and I could hear the surprise in her voice. "Is everything okay? Mom said you were going fishing with Uncle Robert today?" Uncle Robert. She'd been calling him that since she was little, and I'd always thought it was sweet how close they all were. Now it felt different, more sinister. "I decided to stay home instead," I said. "I wanted to ask you something, Sarah. Do you remember me being around much when you were growing up?" There was a long pause, the kind that told me she was choosing her words carefully. "Of course, Dad. You were always working hard to provide for us. Mom made sure we understood that everything you did was for the family. But do you remember me at your school events, your soccer games, your recitals?" Another pause. "Dad, where's this coming from? You were there when you could be. We all knew how busy you were. When I could be." The phrase stung because I realized she was being diplomatic. The truth was, I hadn't been there much at all. But when had that started, and why? "Do you remember me missing a lot of things?" I pressed. "Well," Sarah said slowly, "Mom usually came to everything. And Uncle Robert came to a lot of stuff too, especially after his divorce. He said he loved watching us kids grow up, since he didn't have children of his own. I felt sick. Robert had been more present in my children's lives than I had been, and I was beginning to understand why. Sarah, did your mother ever discourage me from attending your events? Dad, what's going on? You're scaring me. I realized I was pushing too hard, asking questions that would lead to conversations I wasn't ready to have yet. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I've just been reflecting on things lately, wondering if I was the father you deserved. You were a great father, she said firmly. Different from Mom, but great in your own way. You taught us about responsibility and hard work. You showed us what it meant to be reliable, responsible. Those were the words my own daughter used to describe me, not loving or fun or present. I was the man who paid the bills and could be counted on to handle problems, but not the man who created memories or shared joyful moments. After I hung up with Sarah, I called Michael. The conversation was eerily similar. He loved me. He was grateful for everything I'd provided, but when I asked about specific memories of us together, he struggled to come up with many. You were always working, Dad, he said, but Mom made sure we knew you were doing it for us. And Uncle Robert was around a lot, so we never felt like we were missing a male figure or anything. Uncle Robert again. The man who'd apparently filled the gaps in my children's lives while I was working to support them. The man who was now filling the gaps in my wife's life while I continued working to support her. That evening, I sat in my home office and really looked at my life for the first time in years. Our house was beautiful, tastefully decorated by Linda with expensive furniture and artwork. But as I looked around, I realized I couldn't identify a single thing in our home that reflected my personality or interests. It was all Linda's taste, Linda's choices, Linda's vision of what our life should look like. My office was the only room that felt like mine, and even here, Linda had influenced the decor. The leather chairs she'd chosen because they looked professional. The artwork she'd selected because it was appropriate for client meetings. Even my personal space had been curated by someone else. I opened my desk drawers and found something that made my heart sink. A folder of tickets and programs from events I'd apparently attended alone. A baseball game I'd gone to by myself last spring. A jazz concert from 2 months ago. A wine tasting from last fall. All events I'd invited Linda to join me for. All events she'd declined because she wasn't interested or had other plans. But there were also events in Linda's calendar that I'd found on her phone. Art gallery openings, wine tastings, concerts, charity galas, events she'd attended regularly, just not with me. Many of them with Robert, who apparently shared her cultural interests in a way I never had. I began to see the pattern clearly now. Over the years, Linda had systematically excluded me from the parts of life she found interesting or fulfilling. She'd relegated me to the role of provider and problem solver, while Robert became her companion for anything fun or stimulating. The cruelest part was that I'd enabled it. Every time she'd declined my invitations, I'd accepted it gracefully. Every time she'd made plans that didn't include me, I'd found something else to do. I'd been so focused on being understanding and accommodating that I'd allowed myself to become unnecessary in my own life. I thought about all the times over the years when Linda had suggested I work late or take business trips or spend weekends at the office. How many of those suggestions had been designed to give her time alone with Robert? How many opportunities for family time had I missed because Linda had convinced me I was needed elsewhere? The worst realization came when I found my old calendar from 3 years ago. Linda had convinced me to take a solo business trip to Seattle the same weekend she'd supposedly taken the kids to visit her mother. But according to the text messages I'd found, that was the weekend she and Robert had gone to Napa Valley together. I'd been systematically removed from my own family so gradually and skillfully that I hadn't even noticed it happening. Linda had made me complicit in my own isolation, convincing me that my absence was a gift to them rather than a loss. As I sat there surrounded by the evidence of my own irrelevance, I understood something that changed everything. This wasn't just about Linda having an affair with Robert. This was about Linda spending years reshaping our family to exclude me, preparing for the day when she could remove me entirely without anyone noticing much difference. She'd made me into a ghost in my own life, and now she was ready to make me disappear completely. But what Linda didn't understand was that ghosts can see everything, and they have nothing left to lose. She'd spent years making me invisible, but invisible men can do things that others never see coming. I closed the photo albums and put away the calendars. Linda thought she was manipulating a predictable, passive man who would quietly accept whatever she decided to do to him. She was about to discover that she'd actually created something much more dangerous, a man with nothing left to protect except his own dignity and nothing left to fear except remaining invisible forever. Monday morning arrived with Linda returning from her sister visit, looking refreshed and glowing in a way that made my stomach turn. She unpacked her weekend bag while humming that same cheerful tune from my birthday morning, occasionally glancing at her phone with a smile that definitely wasn't meant for me. "How was Sarah?" I asked, watching her carefully. "Oh, wonderful as always," Linda replied without missing a beat. "She sends her love." We had such a relaxing time together, just talked for hours about everything and nothing. The lie came so easily to her that I wondered how many others I'd believed over the years without question. But instead of confronting her, I simply nodded and began implementing a plan I'd spent the entire weekend developing. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night," I told her, as she folded clothes that clearly hadn't spent the weekend in Portland, "about making changes, living life on our own terms." She looked up, suddenly interested. "Oh, what kind of thoughts?" "I think you're right, that I've gotten too comfortable, too set in my routines. I want to start doing things for myself instead of just reacting to what everyone else needs." Linda's face lit up with what I now recognized as relief, rather than happiness. "That's wonderful, Greg. I think that's exactly what you need." Of course she did. "A more independent Greg would be easier to divorce and abandon. I'm thinking of joining a gym," I continued. "Maybe taking some classes, learning new skills. I've always wanted to learn photography." "You should absolutely do that," she encouraged enthusiastically. "Life's too short not to pursue your interests." What Linda didn't know was that I'd already joined a gym the previous Monday, 3 days before my birthday party. Not one of the trendy fitness centers she frequented, but a serious training facility across town where middle-aged men went to rebuild themselves both physically and mentally. I'd also signed up for photography classes, cooking lessons, and ballroom dancing. But most importantly, I'd made an appointment with a divorce attorney for the following week. Not because I'd decided definitively to end my marriage, but because I wanted to understand exactly what my options were and how to protect myself if Linda forced my hand. Over the next month, I began the most disciplined routine of my life. I woke up at 5:30 every morning and went to the gym before work. I'd lost 15 pounds and gained muscle definition I hadn't had since college. The physical transformation was remarkable, but the mental changes were even more dramatic. For the first time in years, I was doing something purely for myself. No one else's approval or input was required. The sense of autonomy was intoxicating. Linda noticed the changes, but interpreted them exactly as I'd hoped she would. "You look great, honey," she said one morning, watching me button a shirt that now fit properly instead of straining across my middle. "This new routine really agrees with you." "I feel like a new man," I replied honestly. What I didn't tell her was that the gym had become my sanctuary, the one place where I could process my anger and channel it into something constructive. Every morning, I worked out my rage on the weights and treadmill, emerging clearer and more focused than I'd felt in the decades. I also didn't mention that several women at the gym had started conversations with me, complimenting my progress and asking about my workout routine. I wasn't interested in pursuing anything, but their attention reminded me that I was still an attractive man when I took care of myself. Linda's indifference wasn't a reflection of my worth as a person. The photography classes were equally revelatory. I discovered I had a genuine talent for capturing moments and seeing beauty in unexpected places. My instructor, a woman named Elena, in her 50s, who'd left her corporate job to pursue art full-time, became a friend and mentor. "You have a good eye for detail," she told me after reviewing my latest assignment. "Most people look but don't really see. You're learning to see." She was right. I was learning to see all kinds of things I'd been blind to before. I saw how Linda's face changed when her phone buzzed with text messages. I saw how she positioned herself at social gatherings to always have a clear view of Robert. I saw how she'd developed an elaborate system of lies to cover her whereabouts, complete with alibis and backup stories. But I also saw that she was getting careless, overconfident in her ability to manipulate me. She started taking longer lunch breaks and offering flimsier excuses. She began receiving work calls at home that required her to speak in hushed tones behind closed doors. She started suggesting I make dinner plans with colleagues on evenings when she was suddenly too tired to cook. The ballroom dancing lessons were perhaps the most important part of my transformation. Linda had always refused to dance with me, claiming she didn't like how I led or that I was too stiff. But at the dance studio, I discovered that I was actually quite good once I had proper instruction. My dance partner was an elegant woman named Margaret, whose husband had passed away 2 years earlier. She was learning to dance, she told me, because it was something she'd always wanted to do, but her husband had never been interested in. "Dancing is about confidence and connection," she explained during one of our sessions. "If you don't believe in your own ability to lead, your partner will never trust you to guide her." The lesson applied to more than dancing. I realized that I'd spent years allowing Linda to lead our marriage, deferring to her preferences and opinions until I'd forgotten how to express my own needs and desires. Margaret and I became close friends, though nothing romantic developed between us. She was dealing with her own grief and rebuilding process, and I was still technically married, despite everything. But our conversations over coffee after dance class helped me understand something crucial about relationships. "My Harold and I were married for 42 years, Margaret told me one afternoon. "We went through difficult periods, times when we both questioned whether we still loved each other. But the difference between a marriage that survives and one that doesn't isn't the absence of problems. It's whether both people are committed to working through them honestly." "What if only one person is willing to work?" I asked. Margaret studied my face carefully. "Then it's not really a marriage anymore, is it? It's just one person clinging to something that the other person has already abandoned." Her words hit me with the force of revelation. Linda had abandoned our marriage years ago, probably around the time she started her affair with Robert. I'd been fighting for something that no longer existed, trying to fix a relationship that only one of us was still participating in. That evening, I came home from dance class to find Linda waiting for me with what looked like a rehearsed speech. "Greg, we need to talk," she said, patting the couch beside her. My heart raced, but I kept my expression neutral. "About what?" "About us. About our marriage. About where we go from here." This was it. After months of preparation, Linda was finally ready to ask for what she'd wanted all along. "I'm listening," I said, settling into my chair rather than joining her on the couch. She looked surprised by my choice of seating, but continued. "I think we both know that we've grown apart over the years. We want different things. We're interested in different activities. We've become more like roommates than husband and wife." I nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking the same thing lately." Relief flooded her face. "Really? I was worried you'd be upset or try to talk me out of it." "Out of what, exactly?" I wanted to make her say it. "I think we should separate, Greg. Maybe eventually divorce. I think we'd both be happier apart." There it was, the request I'd been expecting since my birthday party. "I think you might be right," I said calmly. Linda blinked in surprise. "You do?" "I think we owe it to ourselves to be honest about what we really want out of life. And I don't think either of us is getting that in this marriage anymore." She stared at me for a long moment, clearly thrown by my reasonable response. "So you're okay with this?" "I'm okay with both of us being honest for once," I replied. What Linda didn't know was that I'd spent the past month not just transforming my body and learning new skills, but also documenting everything. I had copies of all her text messages with Robert, photos of the gifts he'd given her, records of the times and places they'd met. I had a complete financial analysis of our assets and a detailed plan for protecting myself in a divorce. Most importantly, I'd discovered something that was going to change everything. Linda and Robert thought they were so clever, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated exactly how much I'd been paying attention to the business side of our lives. As Linda sat there looking relieved that I was taking her betrayal so well, she had no idea that her new life with Robert was about to become very different from what either of them had planned. The next 3 months passed in a strange state of suspended animation. Linda and I continued living in the same house, but we were like actors playing roles in a play, where everyone knew the ending except the audience. She was cheerful and accommodating, probably feeling guilty about planning to leave me. I was equally pleasant, channeling all my energy into the final phase of my preparation. Linda assumed my calm acceptance of our separation meant I was either relieved or oblivious to what was really happening. She had no idea that I was orchestrating the most important business negotiation of my life. The key to everything was something Linda had never paid attention to: the partnership agreement Robert and I had signed when we formed our accounting firm 28 years ago. We'd been young and optimistic then, never imagining that our friendship might end badly. The contract we'd drawn up was ironclad in ways that would have seemed paranoid to outsider, but made perfect sense to two accountants who understood the importance of protecting assets. Buried in Section 12 of our partnership agreement was a morality clause that either partner could invoke if the other engaged in behavior that compromised the firm's integrity or reputation. At the time, we'd been thinking about embezzlement or professional misconduct. We never imagined it would apply to adultery with a partner's spouse, but legally, it absolutely did. The clause stated that if either partner engaged in conduct that brought disgrace to the firm or violated fundamental principles of trust and loyalty, the offended partner could buy out the other's share at book value rather than market value. Given how much our firm had grown over the decades, the difference between those two numbers was approximately $2.8 million. Linda didn't know this because she'd never been interested in the business details. She knew we were successful, she enjoyed the lifestyle our success provided, but she'd always treated my work as something that happened outside her sphere of concern. That indifference was about to cost her dearly. The second crucial element was our prenuptial agreement. Linda had insisted on one before our wedding, worried about protecting some family money she'd inherited. Ironically, the agreement she'd demanded to protect herself was now going to protect me. It clearly stated that assets brought into the marriage or earned through individual business ventures remained separate property. Since I'd owned my half of the accounting firm before our marriage and had built its value through my own work, Linda had no claim to it. She would be entitled to half of our other marital assets, but the business that generated most of our wealth was entirely mine. The third piece of my strategy involved something Linda definitely didn't know about: the commercial real estate investments I'd been making for the past 10 years. Every bonus, every windfall profit, every tax refund had gone into properties that were held in my name alone. Linda thought I was just being responsible by reinvesting in our future. She never realized I was building a separate financial foundation that she couldn't touch. By the time Linda decided she wanted out of our marriage, I'd accumulated nearly $4 million in assets that would remain entirely mine after the divorce. Meanwhile, the marital assets she thought she'd be splitting with me amounted to less than $800,000. But the most satisfying part of my plan was psychological, not financial. Linda and Robert had been growing increasingly bold about their relationship, probably assuming that since I'd accepted the idea of separation, I was no longer paying attention to what they were doing. They started meeting for lunch dates at upscale restaurants, taking weekend trips to wine country, and attending cultural events together as if they were already a couple. What they didn't realize was that I was documenting everything, not for vindictive reasons, but because I wanted them to feel as foolish and exposed as they'd made me feel. I wanted them to understand that their clever deception had been completely transparent to the person they thought they were deceiving. Elena, my photography instructor, had unknowingly helped me develop the skills I needed for surveillance. Under the guise of practicing street photography and candid portraits, I'd become quite good at capturing people in unguarded moments. My photo collection of Linda and Robert's romantic outings was comprehensive and damning. Margaret, my dance partner, had helped me understand the psychology of what I was dealing with. During one of our coffee conversations, she'd shared insights about her own marriage that proved surprisingly relevant. Harold had an emotional affair once, she told me. It never became physical, but for about 6 months, he was completely infatuated with a colleague. What hurt me most wasn't the attraction itself, but the way he tried to convince me I was imagining things when I confronted him about it. "How did you handle it?" I asked. I stopped trying to make him admit what he was doing and started focusing on what I was going to do about it. Once I had a clear plan for my own life, with or without him, he suddenly became much more interested in saving our marriage. What made the difference? Margaret smiled sadly. He realized he was about to lose something he'd taken for granted. People don't appreciate what they have until they're truly at risk of losing it. Her advice crystallized my approach to the endgame. Linda and Robert thought they were in control of the situation, managing my emotions and manipulating the timeline to their advantage. They needed to understand that I wasn't a passive victim, waiting for them to decide my fate. In early December, I made my move. I scheduled a formal business meeting with Robert at our office, telling him I wanted to discuss some changes to our partnership structure. He agreed readily, probably thinking I was going to make his transition to life with Linda easier by offering him a buyout. I also told Linda that I'd accepted her request for a separation and wanted to discuss the practical details. She was so relieved that she offered to cook my favorite dinner to celebrate our mature approach to ending our marriage. The irony of that gesture wasn't lost on me. The meeting with Robert was scheduled for a Friday afternoon after our staff had left for the weekend. I wanted privacy for what was about to happen. "Greg, I have to say I'm impressed by how you're handling all this," Robert said as he settled into the conference room chair across from me. "A lot of men would be angry or vindictive, but you're being really classy about everything." "I try to be realistic about life," I replied, placing a thick folder on the table between us. "Things change, people change, relationships evolve. Fighting against reality only makes everyone miserable." Robert nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. Linda and I never meant for this to happen, you know. We tried to fight our feelings, but sometimes you can't help who you fall in love with." "I understand completely," I said, opening the folder, "which is why I think you'll appreciate what I'm about to show you." I spread the photographs across the conference table, like playing cards. Robert and Linda at lunch, holding hands across the table. Robert and Linda kissing in the parking lot of a hotel. Robert and Linda shopping together for what looked like an engagement ring. Robert's face went white. "Greg, I can explain." "No need," I said calmly. "I think the pictures are self-explanatory. The question now is whether you've read our partnership agreement recently." "What does that have to do with anything?" I pulled out a highlighted copy of our contract and pointed to Section 12. "I think you'll find that sleeping with your business partner's wife constitutes conduct that brings disgrace to the firm and violates fundamental principles of trust and loyalty." Robert stared at the document, his mouth moving silently as he read the relevant passages. "You're invoking the morality clause," he whispered. "I'm exercising my legal right to buy out your partnership share at book value rather than market value. I've had the firm appraised. Your half is worth $4.2 million at current market rates. Book value puts it at $1.4 million. Robert's face had gone from white to gray. "Greg, you can't be serious. We've been friends for 30 years. Friends don't sleep with each other's wives, Robert. Business partners don't betray fundamental principles of loyalty and trust. You made your choice. Now, you get to live with the consequences." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him calculating whether he had any options. What if I fight this? What if I take it to court? I smiled for the first time during our conversation. Then all of these photographs become part of the public record. Every client we've ever served will know exactly what kind of man you are. Every professional colleague will understand why I had to end our partnership, Is that really how you want your reputation to end? Robert slumped in his chair, defeated. When do you need an answer? You have until Monday morning to decide whether to accept my offer or let me file the formal action. Either way, our partnership is over. The only question is whether you leave with some dignity intact. As I packed up the photographs and contract, Robert made one last desperate attempt. What about Linda? She loves me, Greg. We want to be together. I paused at the conference room door and looked back at him. Then you better hope $1.4 million is enough to support the lifestyle she's accustomed to, because that's all you're going to have. The look of dawning realization on his face told me he'd never actually considered the financial realities of their romantic fantasy. He'd assumed he'd be keeping his lucrative partnership while gaining access to half of my assets through Linda's divorce settlement. Now he was going to discover what Linda would do when faced with a much less prosperous future than she'd been expecting. Monday morning arrived with Robert's resignation letter on my desk, and Linda pacing around our kitchen like a caged animal. She'd clearly spent the weekend getting an earful from Robert about our Friday meeting, and the reality of their situation was finally beginning to sink in. "Greg, we need to talk," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Of course," I replied, pouring myself coffee with steady hands. "What's on your mind?" "Robert told me about your meeting, about the partnership dissolution." She was trying to sound calm, but I could hear the tremor underneath. "Don't you think you're being a little harsh?" I looked at her directly. This woman who'd spent 2 years lying to my face and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "I think I'm being exactly as harsh as the situation warrants. But 30 years of friendship, Greg, 30 years of building that business together. 30 years that Robert threw away when he decided my wife was more important than our partnership." I sat down at the kitchen table, forcing her to remain standing. "Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences?" Linda's composure cracked slightly. "We never meant to hurt you. No, you just meant to deceive me, manipulate me, and eventually discard me. The hurt was just collateral damage you didn't want to think about." She sank into the chair across from me, and for the first time in months, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. "What happens now?" "Now we proceed with the divorce you requested. I've had papers drawn up." "Che." I slid the legal documents across the table, watching her face as she scanned the terms. Her expression shifted from confusion to shock to something approaching terror. "This can't be right," she whispered. "According to this, I get almost nothing." "You get exactly what you're entitled to under our prenuptial agreement. Half of our joint checking account, half the value of this house, and half of our other shared assets. It comes to about $400,000. Oof. But the business, your investments, the rental properties, all assets I owned before our marriage or acquired through my individual efforts. The prenup you insisted on before we got married protects those assets." Linda stared at the papers, her face pale. "I can't live on $400,000, Greg. That's not even enough to buy a decent condo in this area. That's unfortunate. You should have considered that before you decided to end our marriage. But I thought," "Robert said?" She trailed off, realizing how pathetic she sounded. "Robert said what? That he'd take care of you with his partnership proceeds? Did he mention that he's leaving the firm with about $1.4 million instead of the $4 million he was expecting?" The last of Linda's composure shattered. $1.4 million? But that's not enough for both of us to live comfortably. We had plans, Greg. We were going to travel, buy a house in wine country, live the life we never had together. Then you should have made those plans with someone who didn't betray his business partner and oldest friend. Linda's face crumpled, but I felt no sympathy. I'd seen her cry before when she wanted to manipulate me into giving her something. This time, her tears were purely for herself. "Please, Greg, 35 years of marriage has to count for something. We can work this out. Maybe Robert and I made a mistake. Maybe we can try counseling, figure out how to rebuild what we had." The desperation in her voice was almost embarrassing. A week ago, she'd been planning her new life with Robert. Now that the financial reality had hit, she was willing to consider staying married to the man she'd called boring and suffocating. "No, Linda, you were right the first time. We want different things. We're interested in different activities. We've become more like roommates than husband and wife. Those were your exact words, remember? But people can change. Couples can rediscover each other. Some can, I agreed, but not us. You see, the problem isn't that we grew apart. The problem is that you're a person who can lie to someone for 2 years, betray them with their closest friend, and then try to manipulate them into staying when the consequences turn out to be inconvenient. I stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the garden Linda had spent years perfecting. I've realized something important over the past few months. I don't want to be married to someone who sees me as a resource to be managed, rather than a person to be loved. That's not fair, Greg. I did love you. No, Linda, you loved what I provided, the lifestyle, the security, the social status, but you never loved me as a person because you never actually saw me as a person. I was just a reliable source of income and stability. The silence stretched between us, heavy with 35 years of accumulated resentment and disappointment. Finally, Linda tried one last approach. What about the children? Sarah and Michael are going to be devastated. They'll blame me for breaking up the family. The children are adults with families of their own. They'll adjust. And honestly, they might be relieved to finally understand why family gatherings always felt so tense. You're really going to go through with this? You're really going to destroy everything we built together? I turned back to face her, this woman who'd shared my bed for 35 years but had never really shared my life. I'm not destroying anything, Linda. I'm simply refusing to continue pretending that something that ended years ago is still alive. 6 months later, I sat on the terrace of my new condo, watching the sunset over San Francisco Bay. The divorce had been finalized without drama. Once Linda realized that fighting would only make her situation worse. She'd taken her $400,000 and moved to a small apartment across town. Robert had left for Portland to start over, his reputation in our professional community thoroughly destroyed. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Still coming to dinner tomorrow? Elena wants to see your latest photos." I smiled and typed back, "Wouldn't miss it." Margaret and I had been dating for 3 months now, taking things slowly as we both adjusted to building new relationships in our 60s. She understood my need to heal from betrayal, and I understood her process of grieving her late husband. We were learning to dance together in life as well as on the dance floor. Elena had become a close friend and mentor, helping me develop my photography into something approaching art. I'd had 2 small gallery showings, selling enough pieces to feel like I might actually have talent worth pursuing. My new condo was smaller than the house I'd shared with Linda, but every piece of furniture, every photograph on the wall, every book on the shelf reflected my actual preferences rather than someone else's vision of what my life should look like. The business was thriving without Robert. I'd brought in 2 young partners who appreciated my experience and shared my values. We were building something sustainable and honest, free from the toxicity that had poisoned my previous partnership. Sarah and Michael had been shocked by the divorce initially, but they'd adjusted more quickly than I'd expected. Sarah had admitted that she'd always sensed tension between Linda and me, and Michael said he was proud that I'd finally started living for myself instead of just for other people. They were both planning to visit next month, and I was looking forward to showing them the man I'd become rather than the shadow I'd been. As the sun disappeared behind the Golden Gate Bridge, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I raised my glass of wine in a private toast. To second chances, to the courage to see clearly, to the strength to walk away from what doesn't serve you, no matter how long you've invested in it. Linda had done me the greatest favor of my life when she asked for a divorce. She'd forced me to discover who I really was beneath 35 years of accommodation and compromise. She'd pushed me to build a life based on my own values and desires rather than someone else's expectations. I pulled out my phone and deleted her contact information, the final step in a process that had begun with her humiliating me at my own birthday party. That man, the one who'd stood frozen on the dance floor watching his wife betray him, was gone forever. In his place was someone who knew his own worth, who surrounded himself with people who valued him as a person rather than a provider who woke up each morning eager to see what the day might bring. At 61 years old, I was finally free to become the man I was always meant to be.